Uh-oh.
Okay. And so we'll start the class. So the last time we met, which was, I think, 4 weeks ago, so we're doing, instead of doing the weekly parasha, we're doing the book of Deuteronomy because we don't meet over the summer, and that's when we meet when we read Deuteronomy. So we're just gonna do as much and get as far as we can. So for the last class, I prepared the first 17 verses of chapter 1, and we got through 9 verses. So I prepared for tonight verse 10 through verse 27, although not every verse. And if we don't get through everything that I prepared tonight, we'll just pick up where we left off the next time we meet. I mean, there is a certain, I don't know, kind of fun, at least to me anyway, that we don't have to, either limit ourselves or cover a certain amount of material. And so of course we are in Moses' farewell address. Essentially, the whole book of Deuteronomy is Moses' farewell address, except really for the last couple of chapters, or actually not even the last couple of chapters, the last few verses, which describe his death. And if we ever get, like 5 years from now, when we get there, we'll look at some of the Orthodox dogma is that the entire Torah was dictated word for word by God to Moses at Mount Sinai. And then the question is, even his own death, right? And there are midrashim that he's writing it down and he's crying and so on and so forth. But there are people who verge on heresy. Well, okay, so maybe this chapter was written by Joshua, not by Moses. But at any rate, so Moses has gone through the history of their leaving Egypt and the almost 40 years by now that they've spent in the desert. And he says, Hashem Elokechem hirba etchem v'hinchem hayom kechovei hashamayim larov. The Lord your God has multiplied you, and behold, you are today as the stars of the heaven in abundance. Okay, and before we look at Rashi, anything sort of jump out to you from that verse? Right? I mean, it's the verse quotes from God's promise to Abraham, right? I will make your descendants like the sand on the shores of the sea and the stars in the heavens, right? But Rashi comes up with a problem, okay? Which is basically, oh yeah? I mean, is that so, right? Because how many Israelites are there, right? I mean, now, of course, they didn't know how many stars there are in the heavens, right? And look, I know as much about astronomy as I know about, let's say, physics, or microbiology, or any it's science stuff. I'm not a science guy, but presumably there are, right, millions and billions of stars in the universe, right? And there weren't millions and billions of Israelites, right? So that's what he's saying. Were they on that day as many as the stars of heaven? were they not only 600,000? Now, of course, this 600,000 figure is problematic too, right? Because it's not 600,000, it's 600,000 adult men, right? So it doesn't count women and it doesn't count children. So, in my rough estimation, I'm figuring like 2.5 million people, right? Not really 600,000, but even so, that's not, as many as the stars of the heavens. So what does it mean when he says, behold, you are today? Okay, he's not talking about numbers. He's saying you are compared to the sun. You will exist forever as do the sun, the moon, and the stars, right? So it's not a numerical comparison. It's more like I guess, an existential comparison, right? The sun, the moon, and the stars are eternal, and the people of Israel will also be eternal, right? Am Yisrael Chai, right? And so the Larov, I guess, Rashi doesn't really comment, but so the Larov would not mean in numbers, but rather in longevity, right? That is so that's right. So that's like, so there is this divine promise, and it's rather continual throughout the Torah, right? And not only the Torah, but the prophets as well. And people sometimes misunderstand this, right? Because God is not promising any individual Jew that things will not go poorly for them, right? He's not even promising the Israelite people that things will not go poorly for them. He's promising the Israelite people that there will always be a she'arit hapleita, a saving remnant, right? There'll always be Jews in the world. The Jewish people, qua nation, will exist, right? And it's it's one of the reasons why, and I've even given at least one high holiday sermon about it, that this obsession that the American Jewish community has with I don't know, you want to call it survival or continuity or whatever, I think is misplaced, right? God has promised us that there will always be Jews, right? Our concentration should be on the quality of Jewish life, right? Not the quantity of Jewish life. And I think the Rashi here kind of, I don't want to say Rashi echoes me. I echo Rashi. I echo Rashi in saying that the focus, God, right? God has promised that we'll always be around as a people. So it's our job to make sure that our existence has some quality and some meaning, and God will take care of the continuity stuff. Okay. Any thoughts or questions on that? Okay. So we'll go on to verse 13. So now we're getting into the arrangement for the governance of the Israelite people once Moses is no longer on the scene, right? I mean, because he knows that he's not going to go into Israel with the people. He's not going to be around forever. Learning structure once he's gone. Okay, so havu lachem anashim chachamim unevonim. Prepare for yourself wise and understanding men, v'yeduim l'shivteichem, who are well known among your tribes, Va'asimem barashechem. I will place them at your head. I will make them heads against you. Okay, so the first comment, havu lechem, he's just explaining a word that might be difficult to understand, although we know it like from one of the Psalms that we sing on Shabbat, Havu l'Adonai b'nei Elim, Havu l'Adonai kavod la'oz. But there, it means give, right? And it actually comes. It's actually an Aramaic root. Okay, so like Havli means give me, or Ana Yehevlach, which is in Cuba, I will give you. Okay. So, he's saying that means prepare yourselves for this. I don't want to spend much time on this particular comment. The next one is a little provocative. Men, anashim, v'chi ta'ale al darcha nashim. Right? Would it occur to you that women, right? I mean, who would think, right, when he says prepare for yourselves men to lead the tribes, right? I mean, right, because Rashi is going to look, not just Rashi, but rabbinic commentary in general is going to look at words that seem to be superfluous, right? And try and figure out what's mean. Yeah, Mike.
I'm just curious. The word anashim, doesn't it mean people?
It means people only by default. No, I mean, I'm serious. In other words, no, anashim means men. Okay, but the way Hebrew works, and there are interesting experiments that are going on trying to develop a kind of non-gendered Hebrew, because Hebrew is a gendered language, okay? And as much as I sort of in theory support that concept, in practice, it makes my ears burn. And I'm also glad at this point to be an old dog who doesn't have to learn new tricks anymore. But so like if you have 10 people, right, and 9 of them are female and 1 of them is male, it's anashim, okay, because a mixed group takes the male plural. But, I mean, so there's a certain element of truth, but there's also a certain element of apologetics, right? But clearly, I mean, Rashi, right, who lives 1,000 years ago in France, right, when it says pick anashim to be the leaders of the people, he's not saying to himself, oh, anashim means men and women. No, it means men, right? It means men, and therefore it's superfluous, right? Because it's self-evident to Rashi that the leaders of the people are going to be men, right? I mean, who in the world would think otherwise, right? And I hasten to add, do not endorse this attitude, right? But you also know that I don't think the way to deal with problematic texts is to excise them from the canon and pretend that they don't exist, right? So,
I agree.
So what?
I said,
Marsha?
I agree. You have to look
Yeah.
at things in the context of the times they were written.
Right. Right. So when Rashi says, would it even enter your head that women could be chosen? The answer Rashi expects is, of course not. Right. No, right? I mean, of course not. It would never enter anybody's head that women would be chosen. So why does it mean, why does it say anashim? It means that they should pick righteous men, anashim tzadikim. Okay, now there's a little bit of context that's missing here. I mean, because the word ish, or plural anashim, often in context doesn't simply mean men, right? Like you wouldn't call 5 guys hanging around outside the 7-Eleven drinking beer and asking people for change anashim, right? The word ish, like it says ha'ish Moshe, right? Anav ma'od, the man Moses was very humble, right? Or when Moses tells the 2 Hebrews to stop fighting, right? When before he has to flee from, they say to him, Mi samcha ish sar v'shofet aleinu. Who made you an ish, a prince and a judge over us, right? So the best, I mean, ish is kind of like the Spanish don, right? Which is like, it's higher than Mr., right? It's higher than Mr., but how do you become don? How do you become don, right? Don Miguel, how do you become a don, right? It's ascribed to you, right? I mean, there's no like formal process. Okay, everybody in favor of Mike Goldman being known as Don Miguel from now on. No, that's not the right. That's simply right. It's sort of an informal process, right? And so I think what Rashi means here is that anashim doesn't just mean men. Okay, it means personages, I guess, if you were translating it into English. Okay, it's not just a bunch of guys, right? It's personages. Okay, hachamim kesufim, desirable men. Okay, that's one translation. Rabbi Kiva Iger says bashful men, men who are ashamed of doing anything wrong. Okay, so they have to be qualified, right? And one of the things that makes them qualified is that they're not merely deterred from wrongdoing by the fear of being caught and the consequences, right? They're deterred from wrongdoing by their own internal motivations, right? And that's what makes them qualified for leadership. Okay, and then nivonim, wise or understanding. All right, and so here, when Rashi says mivinim davar mitoch davar, men who understand and derive one thing from another. Okay, and that's like, it's a very rabbinic way of phrasing things. Okay, everybody's picture has disappeared from my screen except mine and Marcia, and I assume that the problem is the internet on my end, because that's never happened before. But
and also your
your
voice comes and goes too. Your voice isn't always clear.
Right. I mean, there's nothing I can do about it. I mean, it's Verizon. It's not me. But we'll do the best. Normally I'm pretty pleased with Verizon Fios, but I guess everywhere occasionally the service gets to be not as great as you would like. Okay. So mevin davar mitoch davar means somebody who doesn't just accept things at face value, right? But is able to draw inferences. Okay. And I'll give you, I'll tell you a true story that that to me illustrates what it means to be mevin davar mitoch davar and not to be mevin davar mitoch davar. Okay, so I one year when I was the Hillel director at American University, one of the professors who teaches Jewish history in the history department. Some of you may even have heard her lecture or read one of her books, Pamela Nadell. She was on maternity leave, and I filled in for her class actually the whole semester, right? And so when I teach college, which I have taught in other places as well, so I want to give an essay question that has the students kind of synthesize what they've learned, right? Not just repeat that. So the 60-point essay question was compare and contrast the Jewish experience in Christian societies and Muslim societies. Okay, and a couple of days after the exam, one of the students came to me and said, that question was unfair. I said, why was it unfair? She said, well, you didn't teach us that. And I said, well, I taught you about the Jewish experience in Christian societies, didn't I? Yes, you did. I taught you about the experience of Jews in Muslim societies. Yes, you did. Okay, compare and contrast. You didn't teach us that, right?
Whoops.
Right. That is an example of somebody who is not mevin davar mitoch davar, right? That she may very well have been very good at memorizing what I said and spitting it back at me. But memorizing what I say and spitting it back at me, to me, that's not real learning, right? Real learning is to be able to do something with it, right? And so that is what it means to be nivonim. Okay, so this is what Arius asked Rabbi Yosef. Okay, so I don't know who this Arius guy was. Probably my ancestor. I don't know. But you know, presumably a Greek or Roman noble or philosopher, and so, but somebody who, you know, was interested in studying the Torah, obviously, right? So he goes to Rabbi Yosef and he says, Ma ben chachamim lenivonim, right? What is the difference between wise and understanding, right? Because now, why would he ask that question? Right? Because again, the Torah doesn't use superfluous verbiage, right? So if it says wise and understanding, right, it's not just a phrase. It must mean that there's a difference between wise and understanding, right? I mean, which now obviously the leaders should be both. They should be both wise and understanding, but wise and understanding are not synonyms. They're two different things. You could be wise and understanding, or you could be wise but not understanding, or understanding but not wise, right? So what's the difference? So Rabbi Yosef says, right, a wise man is like a rich money changer. When people bring him dinars to examine, he examines them. When they do not bring to him, he sits doing nothing. An understanding man, however, is like a merchant money changer. They bring him money to examine, he examines it, and when they not bring it to him, he goes out and brings his own. In other words, he does not wait for people to come to him. He goes to them. Okay, so what does that mean? Right? I mean, what's Rashi, who presumably got this from somewhere else? Somebody want to explain the metaphor?
I think it's a badly picked metaphor. I think that if you were trying to describe the difference between wise and understanding, that would not be the first metaphor that you reach for to make your point and clarify things. The two words are more self-evident than Rashi's example would lead you to believe.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I have a little trouble understanding it myself, but if I want to assume that Rashi knows what he's talking about, right? So maybe the first money changer is somebody who's simply like that young woman I spoke about at AU, right? She absorbs what she's told, right? But doesn't seek any greater understanding, right? Whereas the second guy is going deeper, right? So maybe it's not the greatest example, right? I admit, but I still understand the point he's making, right? In other words, you know, like if I think of somebody in our community who's the second example, right? Dee Jollis would pop into my mind, right? I mean, she's always taking something that I write or say, and she goes somewhere with it, right? And sometimes where she goes with it is really brilliant, and sometimes where she goes with it is a little off the wall, right? But she doesn't just take it and accept it. She goes somewhere with it. And I'm not saying you all don't do that. I mean, Mike, you've challenged me on stuff before too, right? But that's I think mevin davar mitoch davar, right? That you're taking something and you're thinking about it and you're applying it and saying, you know, how is this relevant to this other thing? Is there a comparison there, or is there an implication there that maybe even I missed, or something like that, right? But that, I think, is what we're supposed to do, right? I mean, if I know, Mike, you weren't in the last class, right? But in the last class, we learned about Shivim Panim LaTorah, right? There are 70 faces to the Torah, right? And I mean, that was from Rashi. Again, he didn't invent it, right? But when he says that Moses explained the Torah be'er heitev very clearly, he says Moses explained it that in 70 faces, right? And this idea, you know, which I think frankly crept into Judaism from Christianity, right? That we should just take what we're told and say, you know, yes, sir, and go march off. I think that's actually completely antithetical to the way Jews have traditionally learned, right?
Yeah.
It's been very much, you know, a pluralistic, but also 70, right? Not infinite, right? There's borders to the left and to the right, but within those borders to the left and to the right, there's a lot of room yet. Okay. All right. So, well known among your tribes, men whom you recognize. For if one were to come before me wrapped in his talit, I would not know who he is and of what tribe he is and whether he's suitable. But you know him, for you have raised him. therefore it says, well known among your tribes. Okay. So again, what's Rashi saying here?
Well, I wonder, see, I would not know, but you would. It would be almost like a selection, a recognition of the people of the tribe as to who the possible leaders might be, of who the wise men might be. Moses would, we have the great number of people, he wouldn't know everybody, so he would
Right.
rely to an extent, I think, on the people or the tribal leaders, because I'm sure there were tribal leaders in each case.
Sure. Right. So in essence, I mean, it's almost a quasi democracy,
Right,
right?
right.
I mean, the people who are most suited to determine who is most qualified to rule over the tribe are the members of the tribe, right? It's not. I mean, if you look at the British Commonwealth, right? I mean, originally the governors general. I mean, the governor general is still in theory appointed by the Queen, right? But it was somebody sent from London, right? And now within those Commonwealth nations that still recognize the Queen as the head of state, right? And so there's a governor general, right? It's a local person, right? And the prime minister tells the Queen who to appoint, and she appoints that person, right? Because the local folks are the ones who are most well suited to determine who should be their governors, right? So it's either a quasi democracy or at the very least, I mean, this is a Catholic principle, the principle of subsidiarity, okay, which is also what Moshe learned from Yitro, right? That instead of all power being concentrated in the hands of one person, right? Because what did Yitro say to Moses about that, right? It's bad for them and it's bad for you, right?
Mhm.
It's not just that it's bad for you, it's bad for them too, right? That decisions should be made at the lowest possible level, right? That that not every decision has to go up to Washington, right? If the county can make the decision, the county should make it. And if the county can't make it, the state should make it.
Mm-hmm.
And only if the state can't make it does it have to go to Washington, right? But government works best when the decisions are made at the lowest possible level. Okay, and this is true. I mean, it is one of the reasons why you will find that certain practices are different in one diocese from another diocese, right? And why, for example, President Biden can take communion in the Diocese of Washington, but if he went to church in Arlington, he couldn't take communion, right? Because it's a different diocese and they have different policies. Okay, and I will make them heads over you. You should treat them with reverence. Okay, and okay, so let's go on to verse 14, right? V'ta'anu oti, you answered me, v'tomru tov hadavar asher dibarta la'asot. You answered me and said, the thing which you have proposed to do or spoken to do is good for us, is good for us to do. Okay. And you answered me. You decided, right? So Rashi is actually not very charitable to the Israelites in this answer. You decided the matter for your benefit. You should have replied, our teacher Moses, from whom is it proper to learn, from you or from your disciple? Is it not better to learn from you who have taken such pains? However, I knew your thoughts. You were saying many judges will now be appointed over us. If one does not know us, we shall bring him a gift and he will show us favor. Okay. Now, so what Rashi is putting in Moses' mouth is that, okay, you guys want there to be, different systems of different levels of governance, right? Because the more people in power, the greater the possibility of corruption, right? I mean, if you assume, I don't know, 1 out of 20 officials will be corrupt, right? If there's 20 officials, there'll be at least one who's corrupt. If there's 200 officials, then there'll be at least 10 who are corrupt, and therefore we can bribe them. I mean, I think that this is unfair because it's not it's what God told him to do, and he's also preparing them for when he won't be around.
Mhm.
So I personally think that this is actually not fair. But does anybody else have a comment or thought on this?
And you answer me. Well,
Okay. No?
I'm just having a little trouble with this. It says, our teacher Moses, from whom it is proper to learn, from you or from your disciple.
Right.
Okay, now the reference is from the disciple. This goes back to, I guess I'm missing a point here, or some missing
Well,
something.
I mean, it would be the sub magistrates that Moses appoints, right? Because they're all students of Moses.
Right.
Right. I mean, there is this idea in rabbinic literature. I mean, having said that, I mean, you can prove pretty much anything that you want to prove if you use principles selectively, right? Because there is this statement, right? Divrei Rav v'divrei Talmid divrei mi shomin, right? The words of a Rav and the words of their student, right? Who do you listen to, right? You listen to the Rav, not the student, right?
Yeah.
But there's also halacha kabatrai, right? That if there's a conflict in rulings, we follow the later ruling, not the earlier ruling.
Mhm.
Right? Why? Because the later ruling has a better understanding of the particular situation, right? But
Correct.
presumably in a hierarchical system, right, where fidelity, right? I mean, if you look at the Gemara, right, they're very, very careful to attribute things correctly and to attribute things to their teacher, right? So if there's a conflict between the words of the teacher and the words of the student, you want to follow the teacher, right? In the same way that, right, I mean, you are better off learning from one of my professors than you are learning from me, right? Because my professor presumably knows more than I do, right? I mean, the difference is that most of my professors by now are dead, right? But but not all of them, right? But that's the idea, right? In a traditional and hierarchical system, right? So that every magistrate is a student of Moses, right? And in fact, that's still true,
Yeah.
right? That's the whole idea of the chain of tradition, right? Right? Moses received Torah at Sinai and transmitted it to Joshua, who transmitted it to the elders, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, down to me, right? So in that sense, right, I'm a Talmud of Moses too, right? As redacted through, several dozen generations, right?
I read this thing and every time I read it, I still can't get away from an interpretation that says we should, on the one hand, delegating is good. On the other hand, you don't have to be afraid of delegating. You'll find yourself among a stranger, but not to worry, you can bribe him.
Yes.
Right. No, I agree. I think I think it's God forbid that I should disagree with Rashi, but I disagree with Rashi. I think he's far too cynical here. I do. Right. I think he's out of line here. I mean, there has to be some subsidiarity, right? Especially since Moses isn't going to live forever.
Right.
Right. And frankly, I mean, at our board level, right? I mean, Tom brought this up, and we are starting to grapple with the need for a chain of succession, right? I mean, basically at the end of every 2-year presidential term, it's like, let's look, all right, who can we stick this responsibility with next, right? And that's not the way to run an organization, right? You should not be in a crisis and say, oh my God, we need who can we stick this job with, right? That you need to have a succession plan, right? And similarly here, I think they need a succession plan, right? Moses knows he's not going to live forever, right? So I think Rashi's out of line, frankly. I do. I agree with you, Mike.
And I don't know where Tom got that from. We have a succession plan. We have always had a succession plan. It's always been the executive vice president who was the president in waiting. The problem we have is there aren't people willing to take the job. And if you told them they were going to take the job of executive vice president with that in mind, they'd say thank you anyway. So then you would have two offices you can't fill.
Right. So we do have a succession plan, but it's not working.
That's correct.
Right. So if you have a succession plan that's not working, you don't really have a succession plan. You have a theoretical succession plan. But again, you don't have to agree with me on this either. But the analogy, I think the analogy is valid, even if your reading of certain facts is different than my reading of certain facts. Okay, so you shall not favor persons in judgment. Rather, you shall hear the small just as the great. You shall not fear any man, for the judgment is upon the Lord. And the case that is too difficult for you, bring to me, and I will hear it. Okay, so this refers to the person who appoints judges, that he should not say, so-and-so is handsome or strong, I will appoint him as a judge. Okay, and God forgive me, right? But immediately, right, Donald Trump pops into mind, who, no, I mean, he always said, oh, I want, he appointed Mattis, right? Because Mattis looks like somebody from Central Casting, right? He's a general from Central Casting, right? And he didn't want to appoint John Bolton. Now, if he said, I don't want to appoint John Bolton because John Bolton is a crazy warmonger, that would have been fine. But why didn't he want to appoint John Bolton? Because John Bolton had a mustache, right? And his idea of a proper high-level presidential advisor is not somebody with a mustache, right? So he picked people according to their looks, right?
Mhm.
He absolutely did, right? And Rashi said, no, that's not how you do it, right? Or so-and-so is my relative. I will appoint him as a judge in the city, even if he is not expert in the laws. And consequently, he condemns the innocent and acquits the guilty.
Oh my God.
God
that's
says,
true.
I will hold it against the one who appointed this judge as though he himself had shown partiality in judgment. Okay, now here Rashi is spot on, right? You don't appoint people because they look the part. You appoint people because they're qualified. And you don't appoint people because they're your relative. You appoint people who are qualified, right? And if you appoint unqualified people, you are responsible for their screw-ups, right? And I mean, this to me is clear and self-evident. Okay,
Describes the
right.
situation beautifully.
Yeah, absolutely. And, 'twas ever thus and 'twill ever be thus, right?
Right.
I mean,
Right.
I described, in my drasha last Shabbat, right? I described how things work in small towns and right, and how it was my task as the head of the ethics committee, right, to kind of root that out, right? That people in Norwich saw no problem with it. Well, I went to high school with this guy, so I'll give him the job, right? And that is a perfectly legitimate basis for appointing people in a small town, right? But it isn't. It isn't the way things are supposed to be done, right? But it was the way things were done, and it has been. Okay. So you shall hear the small just as the great. Okay. A case regarding a pruta, a small coin, should be as important to you as a case regarding 100 mana. So that if the former is presented before you first, do not postpone it for last, right? So in other words, right, every case is equally deserving of being heard, right? And you don't say, well, this is a higher value case, so we'll hear the higher value case first, and the lower value case can wait. They should equally be heard. But another one is, you shall hear the words of the small as you do those of the great. Okay, so basically, you shouldn't go into a case and say, well, this guy is poor, right? This guy is poor, and the Torah commands us to be particularly concerned for the needs of the poor. So I'll rule in his favor, even though he's not really right, because he needs the money, and the rich guy doesn't need the money, right? Or conversely, to say, well, the poor guy really, justice is on his side, but the rich guy will be insulted if I rule against him. So I'll rule in his favor, right? And then I'll catch up to him on the courthouse steps, and I'll say, you know what? Give the guy the money anyway, because he really needs it, right? I ruled in your favor because I didn't want to insult you, but the other guy was really right. That's not the way justice should work, right? Frankly, it is the way justice works, right? It is the way justice works. When is the last time a wealthy person went to the gas chamber in this country, right? Or lethal injection. It's one of the reasons why I'm so opposed to the death penalty, right? Because most most capital defendants are poor, and certainly the ones who wind up actually being executed are poor, and therefore they don't get the representation to which they were entitled. And as you see this with organizations like the Innocence Project, right, where people finally do get decent representation, they're often exonerated.
Mhm.
Right? And it shouldn't be that way, right? But in order for it not to be that way, human nature has to change, right? And I think, I mean, the whole purpose of the Torah is to get us not to act according to human nature, right? But that's a very tall order. It's a very, very
Mhm.
tall order. Right, but that's what the Torah is intended for us to do, is to root out the natural human tendencies which corrupt governance and corrupt justice, to try and root those out as much as possible. But it's a very tall order. All right, comments or questions? Well, we didn't get through as much as I prepared, but we got through actually more than I actually thought we would. So we'll do this again in 2 weeks. Okay.
Okay.
Last questions or comments or thoughts? And Marcia, good luck with your move. I hope you'll be able to still join. I mean, they have internet in Chicago, so.
Well, I'm hoping I will be able, I'm hoping that I will join you. I'm sort of planning on it. I will
Yeah,
miss
Good, good.
You
I
should
will
still,
miss you.
yeah,
What?
you should still be able to read Torah for us from Chicago.
Yeah,
Because
I
as
hope
long as
so.
we're on Zoom, nothing changes.
right.
That's right. So if you,
Right.
I would be very willing to do that.
When
Right.
are you doing this move, Marcia?
Sunday.
Are you serious?
Not, yes,
Oh, phooey.
Yeah.
which is why I didn't
Wow.
volunteer to do anything this,
Right. No,
this
I figured.
That's a real shame.
Yeah. Well,
I'm
you
going
should
to miss
have.
this. I'm really going to miss this, but I figure I hope that as long as it's on Zoom
Yeah.
and I'm able,
Great.
I can stay in touch. I can stay in touch with everyone and be a participant, because this show, the community, has become so important to me, so much a part of my life.
Yeah, it's like where friends become family.
That's right. It really has been. It really has been.